Hello, this is I'm just doing a little workshop talking about hand sharpening tools. So hanging out here in my shop. Alexi, is that pronouncing your name right?
Yep.
Cool. Would you mind catching me up with what your experience is with hand tools? I'm way below screen. And
So,
so I can figure out where we're getting started.
my my experience started back in like middle school, grade six or something, back in USSR, where everybody had to do some kind of physical labor education, and
Yeah.
we had this 4 year or something. Like grade five till grade nine. We had this wood workshop at school, and like we'd do once a week, do something in there. And it was all
Nice.
90% of it was hand tools. So we
Cool.
did like build a chair or something. And since then, I haven't touched them until this year. So
Cool.
it's been a long time. And this year, I started doing all kinds of woodworking in my house. And it's mostly power tools because they feel more, I don't know, predictable. And I have a bunch of hand tools like chisels and one hand plane, but they like I bought them. I'm afraid of sharpening them, so like I don't touch them. So basically, I'm using them as they came in, which I'm pretty sure is not how you're supposed to do it.
Nope. So I'm also new on the new journey. When I was in high school, I woodworked in my dad's shop, but then after leaving high school, I kind of lost access to the shop. Didn't work there very often anymore, and I'm just picking this up as of about 10 months ago. Just starting to get started. Finally, have a space where I can actually build out a shop in my home and getting started with that. My first real project was this workbench. I had a
Looks
lot of
so
help.
cool.
I have a lot of help doing it. I worked in a class at Plate 11 Studios in Ozark, Missouri. We built the vast majority of it in a week. It was 7 days back to back of work in getting everything together. Everything from raw lumber to laminating the tops. There are two separate tops, a front half and a back half. All the joinery, permanent joinery on each of the legs, and then temporary joinery for attaching those to the frame and to each other. Everything we did in the week. And what I gained out of that primarily was not just building something cool, because I could have paid money for that. It was time in the class with a master instructor who had gone down all these roads before. And even the week before I went in for it, I'd gotten a bunch of hand planes and all the prerequisites for the class, and I went about trying to sharpen them, and I did it completely wrong. I did. And so learning in his class the what's and whys of how he does it the way he does it, and how that sets you up for success, huge things. And so I'm looking to pass some of that on.
That's great.
I will start with something that is not related to blades, and that is straight edges. So I have here a straight edge. It is flat on one surface, right? So this is a moderately expensive straight edge because this sight line is dead straight, but it's on one surface. So when I got this thing back home and I was flattening the tube, I got it assembled. I ended up with a situation where the table was slanted inward like that. The front half slanted back down and the back half slanted up. And once you get it all assembled, you have to flatten the two benches to each other. And I used one of these, and I used a methodology called raking light, which is if you have light from far off at a low angle, and then you set this on the surface and you tilt it just a little bit, some light peeks through, right? And you get more light on the low spots and less light on the high spots, and you can use that to mark up where your highs and lows are so that you can then use a plane to flatten it out. Well, the trouble is this here is a single-sided straight edge. There's only one flat surface on here, which means that as soon as I take it and I rotate it up a little bit, I'm not relying on a surface, I'm relying on a line. That line is the intersection of this wobbly side and this perfectly flat side. So I ended up truing up my bench to something that was not straight. And every single time I took this off of my bench and set it down, and every time I picked it up, I happened magically to set it to do it without rotating it. It always ended up in the same position. And so I got it to the point where it was finally dead flat to this reckoning.
And then you're
Then,
dead.
yeah, and then I steamed. I had a couple of like bangs in it that I wanted to steam out and raise the grains a little bit to get it, nice one last time before I put finish on it and start, actually using it as a tool. And in the process, I had to, you raise the grains, so you have to plane it one more time. And I set this down the other way and I tried to use it and everything was way off and I couldn't make sense of anything.
Mm.
And that's because it was just one surface. Now, there are methodologies to use for using a single surface thing to flatten. That's with a feeler gauge, which are little thin strips of metal that you slide underneath to find the low spots. Or you can get a more expensive straight edge that has a straight line. So this here, the big flat half is perfectly straight, and this beveled angle is perfectly straight. And together you end up with a line that is dead straight. The same thing is true with your blades. You are going to be tempted to just sharpen the side that has a bevel on it. That will end you in a situation where you are only dealing with one flat surface, but you're depending on the intersection of two flat surfaces. And so you'll never end up with something that's truly sharp, and it'll dull faster. So the very first thing when you have a new iron, and let me open up because I actually have a plane with a brand new iron with just factory finish on it. And if I bring it up here, you can see there's no reflection. It's brushed, right? And this is a high-end, well-ground plane straight from the factory, and it's not ready to use. Most of the tools that you get like this are not ready to use, because what you need to do is you need to, sharpen it. So you'll want to sharpen the bevel side, but you also need to polish the backside. And that makes it so that you have that true surface for your ever sharpening edge to meet up against. To contrast that, I have on my jack plane, here.
Whoa.
Right?
Yeah.
That's the back half of the blade. And I probably polished way further than I needed to. You really only need the top like half inch or so done. But as you continue sharpening this iron is going to get shorter and shorter because you're going to be removing material. And so at some point, the sharpened bit will intersect with these bits down here. I just didn't have to get it that far already. So that's if you polish the back and then you sharpen the front to get a polish, you can get something that's really sharp. But it's a lot of work to sharpen the whole primary bevel, to polish the whole primary bevel every time. And I've got stuff to show you. All right. So here, if we have, this is a kind of a cross section of the blade, and say there's a little bit of a notch that's been banged into it because you've been working on it. In order to get this sharp, by sharpening the primary bevel, you have to remove all of this material.
Yeah, makes sense.
That whole volume. So a secondary bevel, like this, where you have, your primary is cut here, and then your secondary is a little bit more narrow. In order to get it to sharpness with the same thing, you're having to remove way less material.
It makes sense.
Right? And so it makes it so that you can go from something that's starting to dull to something that is truly sharp much faster because you're doing a lot less work. And then as you do it, that secondary bevel is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and going to require you to remove incrementally more material each time you do it. And at some point, you'll get irritated with the fact that it's taking you longer, and then you grind the primary bevel all over again. You use a power tool to grind that back out. Those two things together, knowing to polish the back and knowing the value of the secondary bevel, just made a night and day difference in terms of my ability to work with sharp tools because A, I know that they're sharp. B, the cost of resharpening it is so low compared to what it was before. Because when I was polishing the entire primary bevel, it was taking me 30 to 45 minutes to get it back to sharpness. And that's a lot of work. And that means that like while I'm in the middle of a project, I will sharpen it before the project, and then I will work with an increasingly dulling blade because I don't want to go through that half hour or more. And then, it's just you end up working with crappy stuff the whole time. But if you do the secondary bevel, it's a minute to get everything back to sharpness. And then you also have the side effect. You get a lot better at setting the iron in your plane and resetting it and getting it ready for a cut. And so my first few times, like it was also 15 minutes to 20 minutes to get the angle right so that I'd be doing the right depth and not like super deep on one side and shallow on the other. And through the repetition of taking the iron out to sharpen it over and over and over again, you get a lot faster at that and a lot more confident in it. Another thing to always remember is oil. Every time you expose new metal, it's going to start oxidizing, right? And so using oil before you put it back in your tool is always good. Make sure you use an endothermic curing oil like jojoba oil, not an exothermic like linseed. Endothermics, they don't let off heat as they cure, whereas the exothermics do. And linseed oil, if you were to take a rag like this and coat it in linseed oil, ball it up and throw it in a waste paper bin, it will catch fire.
Whoa, okay.
Yeah. So, and I mean, especially if you have dust in your shop or if it's in a bin that has sawdust or whatever, like exothermic oils like linseed are hugely dangerous for that. They make great finishing oils, but you have to be really careful how you apply them and how you handle the rags that you apply them with. So if you end up working with one of those, the trick to drying is to spread it out, give it as much surface area as possible, because when it's balled up, it can't release the heat as fast as it's generating it.
That makes sense.
So, but anyway, I use, endothermic oil like jojoba. It's JOJOBA. And I just always have an oil rag that's near my sharpening stuff, hang it on a wall or something like that. And it's just kind of soaked in oil and it's ready to rub my tools down with so that they don't start rusting right away.
Ooh.
Cool. I'm just going to get this iron set back in because I'm not working with this one today. Let's see here. So there's a lot of stuff that's applicable for both chisels and irons that go in plane bodies. Almost everything transfers from one to the other. And I'll be sure to call out what doesn't. What do you think you're going to be working with first, planes or chisels?
Chisels, like I have a bunch
Okay.
of them, and yeah,
Cool.
I find it that like I have a large planer, so I do most of my planing within it magically.
Yeah.
But chisels, like I use them to finish small pieces.
Yeah.
Where, like,
so your chisels, do you have a through tang where the metal from the chisel comes all the way through the handle?
Yeah.
Or do you have a socket? Okay. So it's not as important with through tang ones, but with socket chisels, you don't hold it by the handle ever.
Oh.
And the reason is it's a pressure fit between this and this.
Mm-hmm.
And as the seasons change, more moisture or less moisture in the air, this will get loose. And if you hold it by the handle, at some point you're walking through your shop and it will separate. And this blade will go straight down into your foot, onto the concrete, onto something, and something's getting damaged, whether it's the chisel or you have to grind it back out, or your foot, it's terrible. So handles handles are for pushing and leaning and stuff, but you should always hold
Uh-huh.
the iron itself. So this is a socket chisel, and it's not particularly shiny on the back. It's okay. It also does not have a secondary bevel yet. And it's pretty close to how it came from the factory. I worked a fair bit to try to sharpen this, and then I also sharpened the entire primary bevel, and it took me forever to do. But because I hadn't polished the back, did me practically no good. So this is one that is not ready to be in shape yet. I use what they call scary sharp sharpening setup, which is just it's float glass, so the glass has a perfectly even thickness all the way through it. This is a 1/4 inch thick, and it's real solid. And then stuck onto it is this adhesive abrasive. It's like a sandpaper with a sticky back to it. It's a non-clogging silica-based thing. So as I'm pulling material off of the iron, it's not clogging the pores of the thing. I use a mild soapy water as a lubricant to just help the sludge to float away. Just spray it down to dampness. And then as I'm going to be doing the backside of the blade right now, I just take it out here and I put my finger, I'm applying pressure here with my pointer finger and just using the rest of my hand for stability to keep it from rotating out of under me. Then it's just lots and lots of circular motions. And you can go long ways if you want to, but on this one, the factory bevel marks are right to left across it. And in a lot of my other planes, the factory marks are along it. And I just find that circles are my easiest way to get rid of those milling marks either way. So I have my most abrasive one here, and then I have 2 more plates with less abrasive and less abrasive. And then on the backs of them, the sequence continues. So I can work until I've removed the milling marks that are visible on one. And obviously I've not done enough work on that. It probably would take, for how deep these are and how hard this steel is, it's probably going to take me about an hour's of rubbing on this one to get this ready to move up to the next one. But from there, it moves up pretty quickly. The issue is that it's a very hard steel and the milling marks are just rough. And so I have to remove a lot of material to get down below them. And my most abrasive is not abrasive enough for that. I could probably go with like a sandpaper that was, more gritty than this, but I don't have that, so I work with what I've got. Another thing is the edges of this are also fairly sharp, and I was taught to knock them down with a file, because otherwise, as you're holding and handling, you end up with little puncture marks all over your hands from how sharp these little corners are up here. Yeah, all the time. So with the chisel, it's a matter of getting the back polished, lots of time here, a little bit of time on each of the progressive ones until you get it to a full polish, just like you have on the well, this one is in a little bit better shape. You can see a fair bit of reflection on it. This is the one that I've used the most. It has really, the secondary bevel is so small you can barely see it. And this was ground for me, and I didn't really appreciate the way it was ground because it has a bit of a concavity to it, and I don't like that. So I'll probably end up regrinding it before I use it much more. So once you've got the back to a level of polish that you're happy with, then it's time to move on to the front. And that's where we're going to be setting up our secondary bevel. I use the Kell #2 honing guide. It has these big old wheels on both sides. And I like this one better than a lot of other ones because the wheels on both sides means that it's a lot harder for me to accidentally put a camber in it where I'm rounding it the blade surface. There are honing guys that have like a single wheel back behind, and I don't trust myself to pull that evenly. And so all the help I can get, I take. And then with this one, it comes with a printout instructions, like handwritten instructions, photocopied, but handwritten instructions on like how to use it. This is the documentation that comes with it, which I just thought was
That's pretty
super cool. But it calls out like for all the different angles that you want to do, how much distance do you have between one of the rods that holds the things together and the edge of your blade. And so for me, I like having the 30-degree angle on there. My I think it's ground at 25, and so 30 is just a little bit more than it, and it's not too much. And so this tells me that I need 1 1/16 inch between the edge of the rod and the projection of the tip of the iron in order to get that sharpness. And then I set my gauge down. I don't know where I put my, I lose stuff in my shop all the time.
Yeah, that happens.
Yeah. It literally was sitting right here the entire time. I did not lose it. I just did not look in the right place. So move this to 1 1/16. And then I butt it up against here and do kind of a complicated dance where I'm pushing this forward until it lines up, and then delicately tightening it and realizing that I've let it slip and trying again. And realizing that I don't have this in straight. Yeah. If your square is out of square, you're in trouble. Yeah. It's a lot better. Yeah, so I got it right to the 1 1/16 from there. And so I know that if I drag this across my abrasive surface, that this tip here is going to hit at 30 degrees.
Makes sense.
And the exact angle doesn't matter. Consistency is what matters on the iron. I picked 30 because most of my things are ground at 25, and 5 more than that is really easy for me to remember, easy for me to look up. And I don't accidentally start sharpening this on the wrong thing and, put myself in a spot where I have to take a lot of material off. So from there, it's really the same process through the grits. I use my soapy water, and then I just gently pull backward. On these sandpaper things, they do not like it when you take a blade and shove it into them. They'll actually dig into the abrasive and you'll just tear it off and have to buy more. So I just go through motions of pulling back and then kind of tilting it up, rolling it forward over and over again. And I do this until I have developed a burr all the way across. So as the sandpaper is pushing this way, it's dragging material that way, dragging. And some of it is going to end up floating past the very edge of the blade. And when that does, if you sight down the back side of it here, you can actually start to see a little bit of light reflected at the tip here.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to keep going until that burr has developed all the way across. As soon as it's developed all the way across, you can prove that any divots that had existed, you've gotten past them. And then as soon as that burr shows up, then you can work to remove the burr. Some people will sharpen to a burr on one abrasive, remove the burr, then move up to the next one, and then remove, then move up to the next one, and then remove. Because I use this honing guide, I want consistency more than anything.
Mm-hmm.
And if I have to take this out and put it back in and take it back out and put it back in, my likelihood of consistency is going to be pretty low.
Yep.
So I tend to leave it in, go from my most abrasive all the way up to my finest. And then once I'm done with all of that, then I will gently remove the burr.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to go through all of that because it does take a little bit of time, and this isn't even ready for that. But removing the burr is a matter of taking this and putting it so that your bevel is up, and so your burr is going to be kind of sticking off, hanging off this way off of it. And then you set it on the edge of your sandpaper so that it's kind of projecting beyond the sandpaper. So let me just bring this up, zoom in the old-fashioned way. So yeah, so it's sitting off of it, and what I would do is I would pull it onto the sandpaper, and the burr should be brittle enough that it pulls right off as you do that, and then you're left with a truly sharp edge. So
And you do that on the first stone, right?
I typically remove the burr on one of the middle stones.
Oh, okay, cool.
It doesn't matter all that much. I've not really seen a difference between them. I tend to do it on the back of my first stone, which is my fourth.
Yep.
Out of the six. And that's also partially because by the time I've gotten there, all of these plates are upside down. And so that is the roughest one available to me. And it does a good job. So I typically do it that way. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yep.
Do you have questions
Yep.
about other things?
No, makes sense. I will just need the names of all the things that you use because I wouldn't buy them. Affiliate links and all that.
Yeah. Yeah, the for my jack plane and how polished it is all the way back, that was definitely a lot of extra work that I didn't need to do, and that was definitely a lot of me struggling to to be confident in how I was going to develop the truly flat thing while not ruining the flatness of the blade as it existed. My fear was that as I'm polishing the front, I'm making the back, that I'm making it be curved like that.
Yeah, makes
because
sense.
if I'm polishing only the end that's right next to the blade, I am kind of by definition creating a little bit of an angle there. And my instructor told me, don't worry about that, because that line just needs to be straight left to right. It doesn't need, if it's curved a little bit, that's totally okay. The same is not true for these chisels though, because with these, you're very often using the back half as a reference to a surface. And so if you create a curve on there, you make it so it's really hard to cut something straight. One trick that he taught me with any blade that goes in a body, so any of these hand planes, as long as there's a real body that goes around it, you can use what he calls, and I don't think it was even his term, the ruler trick, to remove the burr. And what that is here's a very thin ruler, super thin. I think it's 5 thou, but really thin, and places it on the edge of the abrasive surface, and then takes the plane that has the burr fully developed across it. And you do the very much the same thing, where you set it down with the burr hovering over open air, and with the back of the plane elevated ever so slightly by this ruler, and you pull it just straight back onto your abrasive, and that breaks the burr off. And the reason why the ruler trick is okay for things that go in planes is because the actual angle of attack doesn't matter. Whereas the angle of attack on your chisels really matters, because you're using that back half as a reference surface. So it's a great way to reliably remove the entire burr all at once, and not get like part of it, not have to make multiple attempts. And I found it to be quite useful. And then, as soon as you take your tool, I already said this, but bears repeating. As soon as you take it from a wet surface, oil, always oil. I have like brand new nice tools that I failed to oil right away, and they're already rusting, and I'm already having to go through, repairing and refurbishing the tools that I bought brand new recently. So, oil.
Cool. This
Yeah.
is great.
Well, it's about all the content I really had.
Perfect. So when you have a moment, if you could just share the names of the stones and all that, and
Yeah, I will. I will do that. And feel free to talk about things in public in the woodworking channel. I'm excited to share more of this with more people. It's a lot of fun. Like, man, I failed horrifically when I first got started with planes, and I'm just so glad to be at a point where I've learned enough that I can actually like really do stuff. Like flattening this surface, like I ended up taking off about 20 thou off of the surface, 20,000th of an inch, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a huge surface. And I was having to, each time I hit 1/2 of this, I was having to sharpen my plane in order to keep it sharp. And so going through that and going through those motions and learning how to set your iron in without like nicking the corner on the plane and, all that. Learning how to get it to the right depth and to be, have that be reliable.
Actually, I do have a question. So
Yeah.
the planes, like how many do you need? Because I started looking into it, and it was like 25,000 different variations. So like I have no idea. Where to even
So
start.
I have one bench plane. That's this guy here. It's a number 5 jack plane. And it's jack because it's the jack of all trades. It's in the middle. You can use it for jointing if you have to. You can use it for smoothing. It does pretty good. I also have this little block plane here, which I should put my iron back in before I lose it. And it is a low angle bevel up plane. And it's really useful for removing material really fast. It's not precise. It doesn't have a big reference surface, but like for this curved surface here, I needed, it came off of a bandsaw and had ridges all throughout it, and I had to smooth those out. And so I used this to get that to a rough smoothness so that I could, do better with the card scraper. With these here, 4 of them came off of a single big long piece of walnut, and that had arched over the course of its drying. And so I cut it down, and I was having to create new reference surfaces on them, but I had like a giant hill in the middle of it that I had to remove. And so I used this to go just across the grain and just rip out as much as I could to get it roughly in shape. So really handy for that. I also have recently got this rabbit plane, and it is meant for using the side as a reference surface and cutting over here. And I haven't used it yet. I'm going to be using it on here. I have to cut out some notches and then get them to perfect smoothness to be able to go in the rabbits down on my bench. And then the last plane that I have is a router plane. And it is meant for cutting plunge depths in things just like you would use a rotary router for. But that's it. I want all the toys, but I can't really justify getting all the toys. So that's what I have now. I'm probably going to end up getting a larger jointer plane, like one of the like number 8s that are like that long and 2.5 inches wide and stuff, because I don't have room in my shop for an electric jointer.
And that's basically why I'm looking at the planes, because I don't have a jointer, and like every time I need to do that, I end up doing crazy stuff with a table saw and or like a router and a trim bit, and like that. That's too painful. So I'm looking to
So the jack did great for jointing this table surface and for jointing these pieces. It did just fine. And I kick myself because I do want to have a larger plane for doing long pieces of material, and it would have made this job a lot easier. So I should have just bought it back then. But yeah, so I think I'll probably end up getting one more bigger one and then maybe one of the smaller ones as well, because this can be a little unwieldy when I'm doing smallish material. Like if I'm trying to joint this surface, it's just a little too big. But you don't need all of them. I'd say work with what you can until it becomes painful and try to figure out why it's painful. In this case, the number 5 has a pretty solid reference surface on it. And so as long as what you have is relatively flat to start with, which you can get to with power tools or, these little planes, like, you don't need all of them. I want to come out to my shop and have like arrays of pretty tools, but it's probably more of a retirement gig for myself than what I can do right now.
Yeah,
they're expensive. Yeah,
we'll get there. Cool. Thank you very much for sharing the wisdom.
Yeah, gladly. Glad to talk about more moving forward, and excited to see what you build.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Cool.
And have a great weekend. Bye.
You too.